Hello guys, welcome back to my channel, my little honey, little baby, little sweetie, little angels. Today I just watched TRISHA Paytas's video about having dissociative identity disorder. And so I've watched the whole entire thing. I've watched Trisha's video. So now I'm going to react to TRISHA Paytas's video about having dissociative identity disorder. My name is Bri. If you guys are new to my channel, just to let you know, I am a mental health therapist licensed in the state of Florida. A lot of the things that I saw in Trisha's video were very disturbing, and not disturbing like, oh my gosh, she has something wrong with her, but there was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of, it was just a lot. First of all, I want to give a shout out to DissociaDID. Her channel is very good, and I think she's very impressive. She's a very impressive young girl who has dissociative identity disorder. She's done her research. She has been diagnosed. She knows the ins and outs of it. And I don't think she was trying to be harsh to TRISHA Paytas, but TRISHA Paytas literally called her out by name. So this is her reacting. So I'm going to react to her reaction to Trisha's video and hopefully clear up some of the things that Trisha said so that everybody's clear and we don't further the stigma of DID.
I'm nervous. Right. Hey guys, what is up? So today I am doing a video which I feel like is a surprise to some, but I feel like once you know, it's probably not that big of a surprise to others. And that is a Meet My Alters video. If you guys don't know what an alter is, it's people that have multiple personalities. No, it's not. Sorry, Trish, no, it's not. An alter stands for alternate state of consciousness. An alter is not a person who has multiple personalities. The person who fronts the most often, is in the body the most often, is called the host. A lot of people tend to think that that is the original or the person whose alters belong to them, but that's a very outdated way of thinking. We have a lot of content on our channel that explains how DID works, how it develops, the theory of structural dissociation. A very simple way that I like to put it is, if you were to drop a glass bowl and it shatters into a number of pieces on the floor, which piece is the original piece? They're all part of the same bowl, but they're also all their own individual pieces. They matter just as much on their own as they do when they were part of a bowl.
This young woman is very impressive to me. She is not being, she's not talking down to her. She's not getting overly upset, even though she is speaking specifically to her in a lot of this video. And she's just giving facts, and I can really appreciate someone who has something. Dissociative identity disorder is brought on by trauma, so the fact that she has DID makes me believe that she has some sort of major trauma or complex trauma, but she's explaining it in a way that's very easy for people to understand, so I really like that about her.
They're still their own object, their own entity, their own existence. No, an alter is not somebody who has multiple personalities. An alter is a personality, an individual, a fragment of consciousness which can develop completely as their own person with their own memories. There will be amnesia between different alters, so they may not have the same memories as other people. They may have different skills that, again, the amnesia prove with the girl that she's speaking about here, and who also had a DID. So no, we're 20 seconds in and that's already incorrect, but hopefully this will improve as we go along. I dated a girl who also had a DID, and we talked about it a lot there. She has I have actually spoken to the girl that she's speaking about here, and this individual, I hope she won't mind me saying, has said that she's very offended by this video, very hurt by this video. So
I would be too.
So just because you've known somebody with DID, that does not necessarily mean that you're educated on the topic of it.
Correct.
Yeah, that's quite sad to hear, actually, from the person that she's talking about, that even though they dated and must have spent a lot of time together. Are you diagnosed with something? Are you bipolar? Are you schizo? And I'm like, honestly, I've never been diagnosed with anything. The closest thing that I have self-diagnosed myself, I guess, is multiple personality disorder. Okay, so again, multiple personality disorder is an extremely outdated term. The term is dissociative identity disorder. It used to be known as multiple personality disorder. It was renamed dissociative identity disorder in the early 90s.
She is correct. Multiple personality disorder is not a term that is used in any sort of clinical setting. It is a layman's term. It is a way for people to explain to other non-clinical people or people that don't understand the disorder, a way to explain it to them because that's what they know and that's what they've heard before. But multiple personality disorder does not exist anymore. It is called dissociative identity disorder, or DID.
So actually in the academic world, the phrase multiple personality disorder has not been used professionally for about 30 years. No, not multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, but they are the same thing, just a different name.
Dissociative identity.
Trisha does say in this video that she has multiple personality disorder and DID, that they're different. They're actually not. Well, for one, multiple personality disorder isn't a thing anymore, and DID and multiple personality disorder are the same thing. It's just one is an actual real clinical term and one is a layman's term. They're not different though, Trisha. Sorry.
Disorder or both, because there's some differences, there's some similarities, and some people just...
No, there's not. No, they're the same disorder, Trish. They're the same disorder. There is no difference. Same thing, different name.
Yes.
Some differences, there's some similarities, and some people just think they're like...
They are the same.
We're all completely different. For me,
Another example of this would be Asperger's. And a lot of people are familiar with the term Asperger's. And that is actually not a clinical term anymore. We would instead say that that person fell on the autism spectrum. Yeah, so that's just another example of just kind of an outdated term that no longer exists in the clinical setting.
I consider them quite similar, but I think my disassociating comes differently than in the form of my alters. So I feel like...
No. The alters are formed because the conscious mind dissociates essentially from itself.
Correct. Another thing that she's not even saying anything about, but I have to, it's not disassociation, it's dissociation. And this happens after major trauma when the brain basically wants to protect itself, so it dissociates from the trauma, therefore causing fragments of the mind that can appear as alters.
Dissociative identity disorder alters are fragmented parts of your consciousness. They are all their own individuals, they develop as their own individuals, as I said, but it is formed because a child experiencing extreme or repeated childhood trauma cannot deal with the knowledge and the awareness that this is happening to them.
A child's brain, because it's not fully developed, does not have the cognitive skills to be able to handle that kind of trauma. So in response to that, that is when our brain goes into survival mode, and DID is sometimes the after effect of major or complex childhood trauma.
So the brain dissociates. It puts up a wall, amnesia, between different parts of the consciousness, so that some parts will remember this trauma, some parts will hold traumatic memories to be able to deal with it, and others won't. The whole disorder is built around dissociation. That is why it was renamed dissociative identity disorder. It's not a personality disorder. Yes, multiple personalities are involved with it, but dissociation is an integral part of DID.
Correct. And personality disorders are an actual group of disorders. They are categorized together in the DSM-5, which is the current diagnostic manual that we use. However, DID is not one of them.
You cannot have DID, dissociative identity disorder, and not dissociate. No, you cannot have multiple personalities, you cannot have MPD, you cannot have DID without dissociation. It is a dissociative disorder.
Alters are my multiple personality, make them my dissociativeness is in a different realm, but it usually only takes place, I guess, under Trixie, which I do.
She's trying so hard.
It's like another alter is coming to the front. This is not something that, like, I don't want to scare people. I always thought I kind of was like taking other people's personalities or borrowing or becoming like my friends or becoming like my boyfriends or becoming around the person I'm around, which I still do to.
Okay, this isn't an unusual thing, okay? A lot of people, when I've said like, oh yes, dissociative identity disorder, explain that it's essentially different fragments, different personalities, different individuals. They've been like, oh, well, yeah, everybody's a little bit DID.
Yes, so that's a common misconception. Just because you have different sides of your personality. You know, for instance, some people act a certain way at work, whereas if they're out with their friends, they may act a little bit differently. That is not dissociative identity disorder, and that has nothing to do with any sort of disorder. You know, we live in a culture where certain things are culturally and socially acceptable in certain places, and they're not in other places. So I think people like to throw that term around a lot, but in my whole professional career, I think I've only met maybe 3 or 4 people who truly did have DID.
I'm a completely different person when I'm at work to when I am at home.
Oh,
personality is fluid. Human nature is fluid. You are allowed to change, and when you connect with people, when you empathize with people, it is not unusual for you to sort of adopt certain mannerisms or things that represent the people around you. And
we all have done that. You know, you spend time with someone who has, you know, from Minnesota, who has an accent, and you know, you start to have that accent if you spend a lot of time with them. That is actually a personal experience, because one of my best friends is from Minnesota. But you know, we pick up little things, we pick up little sayings that people will say that are around us a lot. It's just, it's a human quality. It has nothing to do with DID.
That does not make you any less valid. It's possible for you to get a diagnosis, and that means you require a lot of training to really be able to country who will deal with it, and you should only really do that while you are waiting for a diagnosis, or if it's complete self. That does not make you any less valid. It's very important if you are doing that, and you should only really do that while you are waiting for a diagnosis, or if it's completely impossible for you to get a diagnosis. Maybe you can't afford to see a professional, maybe there's no professionals even in your country who will deal with DID, because it's such a stigmatized disorder, and it's a very complex disorder.
Yes.
And that means you require a lot of training to really be able to understand it / treat it / diagnose it. If you are self-diagnosing, it is absolutely integrally important, and I cannot stress how important it is that you fully understand all the details behind this disorder, the symptoms, how it works.
How do you think that mental health professionals diagnose someone? We don't just like pick something out of a hat. We know all of the different criteria for all of the different diagnoses that we may be given to someone. So when you go into self-diagnosis mode, you're basically doing WebMD for your mind, which we know does not work out well most of the time. When I was in grad school, one of the first things they taught me was, you're gonna learn about these disorders and you're gonna wanna start diagnosing everybody. Like, oh, my Aunt Susie has that, and oh, I have a touch of that, and just don't do it. And so that I would relay to you as well. Don't self-diagnose, don't diagnose others unless you're qualified to do so.
I don't think they just become someone else. I think Trish,
they kind of do. Alters aren't somebody becoming somebody else or somebody picking up traits from somebody else. It is an entirely different part of your consciousness and brain that has completely different life memories, completely different opinions. They may look different inside. They may have a different sex, age, gender, anything like that. They are their own person. It is not somebody pretending to be or suddenly change.
So she's correct. This is not about mimicking or changing yourself for social situations. You may physically look female, and you may have an alter that is a male, you may have an alter that's a child, and they all have their own experiences, they all have their own memories, and they all have their own life.
I really wish I knew when they were coming to light. Like, I know.
You wouldn't know always unless you...
So she uses the term coming to the light, which it reminds me of the movie Split. So if you have seen that movie, it is a very... it's a movie, guys. There are parts of it that are based in real life scenarios and possible things that could happen with DID, but it's a movie. And coming to the light is not a term that I've ever heard anyone actually use other than in that movie. So
are co-conscious, which is kind of like, if you imagine being in the front, being in the body, as being in the driver's seat of a car. Being co-con is having somebody sitting in the front seat next to you.
Correct. So the only time that someone would know what is going on with one of the other alters is if they're co-conscious with them, and she explained it.
So you can feel their thoughts, sometimes you can hear their thoughts, you'll be able to have an exchange, a passive influence of their emotions and things like that. But if they are actually fronting, so another alter actually takes over the body, generally, unless you have very good communication and have been through therapy and things like that, again, this is not an easy thing to do, it takes time.
No.
You will not know what they were doing because of that amnesia barrier, and amnesia is necessary to have DID. So
having DID is dissociation. So when an alter is fronting, you're dissociating. You, as in whichever alter, is dissociating at that time and has amnesia to that point of that person's experience unless they are co-conscious with them. People with DID sometimes lose large chunks of time. To give you an example, someone may remember getting home after work and then they end up in somebody else's house when they're waking up and they have no conscious memory of anything that happened. They dissociated that whole time. So someone with DID that dissociates for that period of time, unless they're co-conscious with the other alter, they're not going to know what transpired in that time. So DID, typically they do have an inner system where, you know, through therapy, like she said, and through a lot of work and understanding, they can speak to each other and communicate with each other.
What Trish is trying to talk about is co-consciousness and then getting confused between how alters fully front and whether you can and can't have a memory of that. Again, it differs for every system. Okay, so this is another thing about her talking about trauma happening at around the age 10 to Tracy. Okay, in order to develop DID, it's kind of complicated. You wouldn't have necessarily fully formed alters before the trauma that creates the DID. So when we're children, we start off with basic concepts and awareness as children. That's why babies can go from being very happy to crying in like 0.5 seconds and the opposite way round. They are very basic states of being. I need food, I need love,
basic
I need to go to the toilet, I'm cold, this hurts. Very basic awareness. As we grow older, we start to learn about the world, we start to understand things, we start to learn what we do and don't like, we start to create connections to our primary caregivers and understand the give and take that comes with relationships. We start to form our own opinions. In order to develop DID, there has to be repeated childhood trauma before the ages when your personality fully integrates, because this trauma is what makes the brain put up these amnesia walls and say, nope, we can't have any recollection of this, we cannot survive this if we are aware of it, we need to dissociate heavily in order to survive. It is a survival mechanism.
It really is
very serious. In order for DID to form, this has to happen before the personality has coalesced.
She's absolutely right. So in Trisha's video, she said something to the effect of she had a trauma, alter experienced a trauma at age 10. So unless something had already happened to her, she's not explaining it in a way that makes sense in a clinical way. You would have to have early childhood intense trauma. Now, examples of this kind of trauma would be childhood sexual abuse, satanic ritual abuse, physical abuse, severe neglect, things where the child's brain is so traumatized by whatever it is that's happening that the brain is in survival because they can't handle it. Adults can barely handle it. Kids can't handle it.
Struggle? I don't know how to describe it.
It's a disorder, Trish.
To me, I don't consider it a disorder, but the same beings inside of them, and they're able to more comfortable life. And this sounds crazy. I sound like I'm losing my mind.
See, this is another issue. A lot of people do think that people with DID are crazy.
Referring to someone who has DID as crazy is not only very demeaning, very hurtful, but it's also just incorrect. Crazy is also not a clinical term. Insanity is not a clinical term. Please don't call people crazy. I'm not going to watch this whole video because this video will be really long, but I just want to say that I applaud this young woman for making a response in a very mature and calm and informed way. Her system has done a lot of work. I give applause to her. I think Trisha Paytas, again, I don't know Trisha Paytas's trauma history, but I think that, you know, she has a video about being trans. She has a video about being gay. She has a video about being a chicken nugget. You know, everything that she posts, just take with a grain of salt, you guys. This is the internet. You know, we're not going to Trisha Paytas to diagnose us with anything, I hope. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to link the channel down here. I wish her all the best of luck in the future. Until next time, guys, please go out and give someone a compliment. It'll make you feel good. It'll make them feel good. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye.